Hello, I want to talk to you a little bit about Rian Johnston's Glass Onion, the sequel to the 2019 film Knives Out. Hello, my name is Sarah Zedek. My pronouns are she, her. Back in 2020, I did a video essay called The Simple Art of Trolling Everyone. It is scanned from a VHS tape and it's in 4:3. Don't ask me why I did this. I like ugly things and I wanted that video to look ugly, and then nobody watched it. Weird how that works. So I'm babysitting a friend's cats right now, and I'm sitting here in their little reading corner, and I was just like, I want to talk about Glass Onion. So I'm talking about Glass Onion. So I want to start by saying that I liked Glass Onion. I watched it. I didn't get to see it in theaters, but I watched it, whenever it went to streaming, and then I watched Knives Out again, and then I watched Glass Onion again. I've been a big fan of Rian Johnston's for a very long time. Brick came out when I was, what would that have been? 2003, 2002? I was in middle school when that came out, but I watched it when I was in high school, and it was like, oh, you can just kind of do anything genre-wise. And so I followed Rian Johnston's career for years after that, and I found a lot of his films to be very mixed. I think, what was it? The Brothers Bloom is interesting, but it's not great, but it's interesting. And then I would say Looper is cool and interesting, and also kind of not. Like, Rian Johnston's films are interesting because they are good for a particular type of autistic person, which I just so happen to be. So the thing with like Brick is that it is a detective noir that is set in a high school. So you've got what's that twink's name? Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Someone get this hothead out of here. And where's that DWP?
You've got Joseph Gordon-Levitt as a little high school detective guy who is looking for the person or persons who are responsible for the death of Claire from the television show Lost. Then Looper is another one that's like, it's a time travel movie, but it's sort of playing off of La Jetée and 12 Monkeys, the Terry Gilliam one. And yeah, on and on and on. You know about Rian Johnston. He directed some episodes of Breaking Bad. He did a Star Wars that I thought was pretty good. I think opinions about Rian Johnston films have always been and will always be divided, because it really depends on the extent to which you enjoy a Rian Johnston film really depends upon how much you value genre and meta playfulness. I will admit that the characters in his films, with a handful of exceptions, are typically not the most interesting. They're less character stories than they are sort of plays on genre tropes. It's very clear that they're films coming from somebody who has watched a lot of genre media or taken in a lot of genre media and has a lot of opinions about like what works and what doesn't, and can pull together a sort of cohesive, interesting story that, once you leave the theater and you look at it, it's like it doesn't quite all make sense. But that's the magic of movies, it doesn't have to make sense because it's a film. You watch it and it's there and it's like, well, that didn't make any sense, but the movie exists. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. So before Glass Onion came out, I had a handful of friends who do the festival thing. They go to film fests and they watch movies before they come out for the proletarians. And they told me, ooh, Glass Onion is really good, and it might even be better than Knives Out. So I went into this wondering, not sure what to expect. The trailers did not leave me feeling overly optimistic, but also Rian Johnston movies always look like shit in the trailers. That's just a fact. Generally speaking, just as a rule, good directors, people who make like interesting movies that are trying to do more than the typical kind of movie, they don't usually look very good in trailers. That's just sort of a thing. So there are certain directors where I'm like, well, that trailer looked like garbage, but maybe the movie itself will be better, and quite often I'm right. So I tried to temper my expectations of Glass Onion because I didn't want to come out of it thinking, ooh, this is going to be just as good, if not better than Knives Out, and then come away feeling super disappointed. So I went in with tempered expectations. And I would say that Glass Onion, on the whole, is a pretty good movie. I liked it. I think it's an enjoyable experience. It is definitely a weaker film than Knives Out, and that's kind of what I want to talk about here. I feel bad because I think this video is going to come out feeling a little bit more negative about Glass Onion, and that's not necessarily my intention. So I want to just put it out in the front. Like, I watched this movie 3 or 4 times in the span of a couple of days, so that might have something to do with the fact that I kind of got a little bit sick of certain elements of it. But then I went and rewatched Knives Out just to sort of like see, compare. And watching Knives Out again sort of helped me understand, like, yes, Glass Onion isn't as strong a movie. So I want to talk about why Glass Onion isn't as strong a movie. When we think about Rian Johnson as a guy who is aware of genre and is always playing with genre, Knives Out is sort of the perfect movie for him because it is a pastiche of Agatha Christie novels and so many other sort of locked room whodunits. And Glass Onion obviously is a follow-on from that. It's doing what these kinds of stories always do, where there is one that is in one setting, and then there's another that is in a completely different setting with a completely different cast of characters, except for the detective. The big thing with Benoit Blanc is just, he's fun. He's a fun character, great accent, great performance. I know I said earlier that Rian Johnson isn't great necessarily at characters all the time, and I think that that's true, but Benoit Blanc is a big sort of success story for him. But I do think that at least half of that, if not much more, goes to the charisma of Daniel Craig as an actor. Some of the writing is good. I actually find some of the writing in Glass Onion not as sharp as the writing in Knives Out. So in Knives Out, you had this writer who committed suicide, but there was still a question of murder, and it's all about this wealthy family and this very poor working class nurse that is sort of embroiled in the middle of all of their drama, and it is an examination of the conditions in which people of the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, will accept the working class into their ranks versus the point at which they will turn against the working class, and how people who are more and less sympathetic to the needs and woes of the working class will ultimately still band together against the working class because their material interests are always on the side of wealth. So you have the moment in Knives Out where the crypto neo-Marxist or whatever who vapes, she sort of turns on Marta, rats out the fact that her mother is a human being who failed to follow the rules of an arbitrary bureaucracy. And so that is sort of the drama that plays out, is like, who can you trust? And how does wealth corrupt the relationships that we have? And I think that is the perspective from which you should be going into these movies. Like, is each individual character really that interesting? No, not particularly. Do they have arcs? No, not really, they don't. But not every movie needs to have characters with arcs. It just needs to be something. Glass Onion is fascinating because it's sort of a remake of Knives Out. Knives Out has a really interesting structure where it's sort of like 3 different detective films all in one. So you have the first one where it's just, we are learning the circumstances of this family, and we are learning all of the ways that they are lying and not lying, and how all of them have an incentive to kill Harlan. And then you get the coin flip, and then the turn where it's revealed that Marta switched the vials and that Harlan killed himself to make sure that she wouldn't go to jail. And then the next third of the movie is her trying to sabotage the investigation without being caught, while Benoit Blanc is like, ooh, you're my new assistant. And then the third act is when things start complicating and we it's the denouement, it's the moment when everything sort of comes together. But it's a 3-act structure where each one sort of plays on your expectation, where it builds on this formula and it says, here's what you're sort of looking at, and then it reaches a moment where it feels like you've gotten all the information you can from this section, and you think you have a pretty good grasp on the kind of narrative reality. And then there's a twist. And twists, I just want to say, just generally, are not good or bad. They're just a tool, and a twist can be good, a twist can be bad. I tend to like Rian Johnson's twists. I like it when he sort of like flips a switch, and then we're in a different narrative reality where, yeah, it just works. It plays with your expectations, and it keeps you on your toes as a viewer. And then on subsequent rewatches, it's fun because he tends to plant lots and lots and lots of little hints and things so that when you come back to it, you see how well integrated the whole script is. Glass Onion, rather than being about a writer's family, is about a bunch of influencers who are all the toadies of an Elon Musk type. And they are all sort of competing for his wealth. And it's the same kind of thing where Benoit Blanc is invited to this island under mysterious circumstances, and it's this big getaway for all of these rich people. So in the opening, you have everybody getting all of these mystery boxes, and they're on the phone, and they're like trying to figure out like, ooh, what's this puzzle? What's this puzzle? And it's a fun sort of back and forth where we're jumping around between all of these different rich people who are trying to solve this puzzle box that they've just gotten in the mail, and they've all got the same one. And then they finally do it, all these puzzles, and open it up, and it's an invitation to go to Miles Braun's island. And they're all like, ooh, wow, we solved this incredible puzzle. That's amazing. And then we get to see Janelle Monáe in her basement looking at one of these puzzle boxes, unsolved, and then she takes out a hammer and smashes it to bits. That is a fantastic moment. That is a great way to establish character. Here are some people who are infinitely credulous about the gimmicks of this rich asshole, and here is somebody who is very invested in just not giving a shit, who has no time for these games. Rather than not taking Knives Out's structure, Glass Onion does something a little bit different, where it is two films, basically. And it actually does the changeover at almost the exact middle point of the film. I'm going to just say, like, the murder mystery part of Glass Onion is weird because Miles Braun is doing sort of a fake, like, I'm staging my own death and we're doing a fake murder mystery that you're going to have to spend the whole weekend trying to solve. And Benoit Blanc is like, oh, but somebody is actually trying to kill you. So the first half of this movie is taken from the perspective of the influencers, and we open on somebody knocking on a black door. That's the first shot of the movie, and they open it up and it goes into these mystery boxes. We see a little bit of Benoit Blanc in the bath. We see him get a box, and then we jump ahead and they're all in Greece and they're getting ready to go to this island, and it just kind of goes through. We get introduced to the Elon Musk guy. We get a sense of the character dynamics of the influencers and Janelle Monáe's character, and it just kind of goes along as we're sort of seeing, like, you know, ooh, these characters all have history and sort of secrets that they're keeping from each other, and like reasons to not like each other. And then, of course, it's revealed that Miles Braun has the Mona Lisa in his room. Just lots of rich people shit, lots of art, lots of statues. And so that first half of the movie is just kind of getting acclimated to the island and to the character dynamics, the personal dynamics, I should say, between the influencers and Miles Braun, kind of vaguely through the eyes of Benoit Blanc, but mostly through the sort of like roving camera, where it's not specifically rooted to these characters, but it is rooted to sort of their approximate narrative awareness. And I'll explain what that means when I talk about the second half. Dave Bautista's character dies drinking something, and it's clear that it's Miles's glass, so it's like, oh no, somebody was trying to kill Miles, but Dave Bautista drank his drink instead, and now he's dead, and so that there's the murder mystery, and that's the point at which it pretty much comes to, the first half comes to an end. Like, he dies, and then all the lights go out all at once, and there's a whole chase, and there's a very funny moment where Daniel Craig is sort of going through, and he gets into the kitchen, and he shines a light on this sort of vertical plastic knife stand, and one of the knives is very clearly missing, and he's just like, oh Lord help us. That's very amusing. That was a very amusing little moment. A lot of amusing little moments in this movie. And then Janelle Monáe's character shows up, and then she gets shot, And we see her covered in blood, and we see him looking down solemnly. And then everybody kind of shows up. Blanc starts doing his detective thing, which is taking off his shirt and rolling up his sleeves. And he starts giving his sort of "I figured it out" speech. And then it cuts to black. And then we see somebody knocking on a white door. And that is the second half of the movie. And then from this point on, we are from Janelle Monáe's character's perspective. And what's interesting about the second half of the movie is that it sort of runs back through a lot of the events that we have already seen. And it does something really interesting structurally, where it's the same scene of we got Blanc in the bath, hearing a knock at the door, and Hugh Grant saying, "Oh, there's somebody at the door for you with a box." And we get the other side of that, and it's Janelle Monáe's character with the box. So we get this added context. Janelle Monáe's sister was the friend of Miles Braun and got robbed of all this money because she wrote the idea for this whole like corporation's weird news thing. Miles Braun stole it and cut her out of the corporation. And then when she threatened to basically take down his empire because she found the proof that she wrote all this stuff, somebody kills her. And so Janelle Monáe wants to hire Benoit Blanc to find out who killed her twin sister. Benoit Blanc is like, well, if I just go by myself, they'll clam up immediately because they'll know, oh, somebody's. But if you come along, then somebody there will be like, oh, but I killed her. Why is she here? And that will help us a lot. The second half of the movie is playing with the twin trope, which is another sort of classic staple of the murder mystery of, oh, somebody is playing their twin. Meow. Meow. And so that section of the movie does some interesting things. Let me pull this down a little, get some of this light off my face. So once in the second half of the movie, once they get away from the sort of investigation and recap stuff, then we get to kind of dovetailing previous scenes. So there's the scene where everybody gets off of the boat. In the first half, we see Blanc talking to Janelle Monáe's character, and they say like, oh, this rich person shit is so tiring or whatever. Then she says, oh, it looks like you have a flat tire there, and he sees that he has his shoelace untied. And then at that moment in the first half of the movie, we cut away, but in the second half of the movie, we get the scene of him tying his shoelaces and Janelle Monáe, him and Janelle Monáe sort of plotting about how to go about figuring things out, how to go about investigating. So they do this, and we get like the same scenes a couple of different times, but from different angles. And I've seen some people complain like, oh, the second half of the movie is just sort of recapping the first half again. But I think having rewatched it, I think it does a pretty good job of cutting out everything you don't need, more or less, with like one big exception for me. So they investigate, and like we get the scene where Janelle Monáe's character gets shot. And what I like about this, so she gets shot, and then we get a shot that is not in the first half of the movie, and it's Benoit Blanc looking down at her immediately after she's been shot, and he sort of does this like, where it's like he's just watched somebody die, and it's very painful, and I like that shot isn't in the first half of the movie. Because at that point, we have not humanized Janelle Monáe's character quite at the same level. We don't know what her deal is. So she's just somebody who's died. And, Benoit Blanc, his dad was a cop, as we learned in the first movie. So, whatever, he probably has seen his fair share of dead bodies. It doesn't, faze him. But in the second half, we know his history with her, the fact that he has, a little bit of an affinity for her. The thing that makes sort of a Benoit Blanc mystery is Benoit Blanc latching on to a working class person who has a penchant for figuring things out. It's Marta in the first movie, and then it's Janelle Monáe in this movie. I feel bad that I can't remember Janelle Monáe's character, but that kind of that's sort of the part of the problem with Glass Onion compared to Knives Out. Knives Out was full of really great character actors, but they felt like characters more than they felt like actors. Do you know what I mean? Get to Glass Onion, I see Dave Bautista. All I see is Dave Bautista, and the character that he's playing is like a gamer. He's supposed to be like an incel gamer type doing. I guess he's sort of the Alex Jones stand-in, and he's just too ripped for it. There's a flashback sequence where we see all these influencers back in the days before they were rich. He's supposed to look like kind of just a nerd, and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I don't like Dave Bautista for that role. He's a wrestler. This is just that guy. This is just that guy. And it's the same way with, I don't think Edward Norton does a great job with, this is what's hard, is that I think everybody actually in the film is doing the best job that they can, but I don't think that it makes sense to use these actors for these parts. I think Glass Onion is partially harmed by its casting. I think Edward Norton is too charismatic. He plays up the stupidity admirably. If you ever see pictures of Elon Musk from different angles, you start to realize like there's like an uncanny valleyness to rich people, to how they look, to people of a certain wealth who care about how they are perceived. At a certain point, they start reaching levels of uncanny valley where it's like, what are you even? They just start to turn into like slugs. They turn into like sheets of flesh, like in that one episode of Doctor Who.
Moisturize me, moisturize me.
And so I would have vastly preferred an actor that I didn't know in that part. It's just like that in a couple of different places. Like Janelle Monáe, I think she does a pretty good job with it, but I'm not always sold on her performance. To finish the fucking recap of Glass Onion, they discover that Miles Braun was behind the whole thing. He killed Janelle Monáe's sister. He is the one who killed Dave Bautista. He was the one who tried to kill Janelle Monáe a second time. Benoit Blanc has this whole speech where he says, I, like the rest of the world, was convinced that Miles Braun was a genius. But look to the center of this glass onion and you will see Miles Braun is an idiot. Ultimately, what happens is the proof gets burned by Miles Braun, and then Blanc is like, well, there's nothing we can do, and then he leaves and then hands Janelle Monáe a glass of like whiskey and says, and a reminder of why your sister left in the first place. So she drinks it, and then she starts breaking all of his shit. It's fun how this works, because this room is full of like glass stuff. So she starts picking these things up and throwing them down, breaking them. The earliest moments of that scene where she starts breaking these glass things doesn't really work for me. Like she does this thing where she like hand walks up one and then pushes it and does a pouty face and then goes around, and it just doesn't feel right to me for that character. As a working class person who has imagined going ham on a rich person's estate many, many times, I just didn't feel like she embodied enough of the glee of breaking a rich person's shit. And that's kind of that's one of my bugbears that, take it or leave it. I still think she does a good job. All the influencers join in and they start breaking stuff with her, and it's all very fun. And then they stop and they're like, woo, yeah. But Janelle Monáe keeps going. She breaks more shit and everybody's like, whoa. I love when she breaks the Liberace piano. That part's great. The whole thing is centered on this like hydrogen fuel that is really untested and really dangerous, that they've already been like, oh, we're going to put this in a manned flight and we're going to put this in homes across the nation, but it creates hydrogen gas that turns buildings into the Hindenburg, and so the glass onion blows up. The Mona Lisa is there, and there's a button that they can press to open up the glass to expose the Mona Lisa to the air. And so Janelle Monáe runs in slow motion in an echo of the scene in Knives Out where Ransom decides to kill Marta. She runs, and Miles Braun runs to try to intercept her, and there's a great little bit where he jumps to try to tackle her, and she is just completely unfazed. I really like that shot where she just sort of nonchalantly just brushes him off and then like soars, and her face and that like slam dunk. I really liked that. I thought that was great. As somebody who has imagined setting literally the Mona Lisa on fire multiple times for reasons that I won't get into, that was very pleasing for me. I like that this film sort of comes to the conclusion, or at least suggests the conclusion, that art, when it is a commodity that only exists for brownie points for rich people, when art is turned into that kind of vulgar commodity, then it is worthless to real human beings. And the only thing that can be done really is to destroy it. Ideally, you would appropriate it. You would reappropriate it. But that requires guns and mass scale organization. And we're a little ways from that at this moment in history. So that's Glass Onion, right? And it's a fun movie. There's a lot of schadenfreude about rich people. It's fun to watch them squirm. It's fun to see Benoit Blanc call Elon Musk an idiot. I've seen people complain that this movie is a bit too online, and I have two things to say about that. The first is that if you think that Glass Onion is more online than Knives Out, you're kind of correct, but also go back and watch Knives Out because it is pretty online also.
Alt-right troll.
Liberal snowflake.
The second thing is, so this movie is about Rian Johnson's Twitter feed. Whodunits have always been about Twitter feeds. Agatha Christie, do you think that the Poirot mysteries were not just Agatha Christie complaining about various types of guy that annoyed her at one of her many dinner parties? It is part and parcel with the genre that detective stories are about the bourgeois and the working class of the era in which it is produced. And it's not meant to be revolutionary. It's not meant to be like a call to arms necessarily. It can be, but most of the time they're not. I would not say that Knives Out or Glass Onion are a call to action. They're just meant to be schadenfreude. They're just meant to be films where you watch them and you go, yeah, fuck rich people. Glass Onion takes place more in the real world than Knives Out did, I think. There's so much more name dropping. There's so much like, there was a mention of Instagram in Knives Out, but in this, it's like there's Jeremy Renner's hot sauce. There's Jared Leto's kombucha. I find it interesting that both of them are extremely canceled human beings. There's all sorts of other, like, names that are dropped and apps and services.
You're the imposter. We all know it.
I'm gonna Shazam it.
Everything is so woke these days, it's out of control.
And the answer is no, Jimmy Kimmel.
Oh my God, it's full of stars. 2010, here we make contact.
The first influencer to have 1 million followers on Twitch.
Ah, it's my Google alerts.
That was some real red pill stuff, Miles.
Remember child equals NFT?
When Duke got banned from Twitch for hawking rhino horn boner pills,
he's leaning harder right into this fandom stuff.
I have all of our TED Talks on this thing.
Obviously, this is set during the pandemic, and that's wild that this is a film that's set during the pandemic, and I hope that we get more movies set during or about the pandemic and, like, acknowledging that it happened. I like how that plays with class. Like, there's the one rich person who's her whole sort of character is just that she's dumb, and that kind of sucks. But she has a mask that just has holes in it, and it's not even a mask. And I like that. That felt very real to me. A lot of the commentary on who was in lockdown during lockdown, I found that part to be pretty amusing. Oh, one thing that I noticed right off the bat, one of the first shots we get of the film is close-up of a computer screen, and it dollies back and we see the Apple logo on the computer screen. And so if you have watched one of the Vanity Fair shot thing that Rian Johnson did, you will know that one of Apple's things is that villains in movies cannot use Apple products.
I don't know if I should say this or not. Not because it's like lascivious or something, but because it's going to screw me on the next mystery movie that I write. But forget it, I'll say it. It's very interesting. Apple, they let you use iPhones in movies, and this is very pivotal if you're ever watching a mystery movie, bad guys cannot have iPhones on camera.
So if you see that Dave Bautista is using an Apple product, you'll know he is not the killer. And then there's the fact that Miles Braun does not have a phone, which felt very much to me like Rian Johnson looking back at him revealing this particular stipulation on Apple's part and saying, okay, I'm just going to throw a wrench in that and say this character doesn't have a phone. I would say that at the end, the film is a little bit too eager to explain what it's doing to the audience. We get too many flashbacks to fill in all the blanks. I actually really don't like Benoit Blanc's speech. The Knives Out speech in Knives Out is great. The knife donut speech is fantastic. This one is a lot weaker. I like the concept of the Glass Onion, and I think they do some fun stuff with it, but the whole film is sort of predicated on this idea that everybody is still under the spell of the Tony Stark billionaire existing in real life. And on the one hand, I think Glass Onion is helped by being released now because we are all talking about Elon Musk and Twitter. And so a movie that is very clearly about Elon Musk and is throwing him under the bus very, very correctly, that's great. But I think also it works against Glass Onion because everybody kind of knows that he's an idiot now. And so that kind of thing of like, look into the center of this glass onion and you will see Miles Braun is an idiot. Like that, it's funny. It's Schadenfreude, it's nice to see. It's fun as a working class person to see somebody calling a billionaire an idiot to his face. But it doesn't, I don't know. It's sort of like, well, yeah, of course he is. Of course he is. And the way that they flash back to all of the fake words that he said, I don't know. I think it spells things out too much. I don't like that Benoit Blanc is like, imbreviate. It's not a word. It sounds like a word, but it's not a real word. That part bugs me. Because that's when you start to get into kind of, oh, here's Rian Johnson showing his hand. Yes, obviously billionaires come up with fake ideas to sort of rebrand anything and everything that they want to claim for themselves. And that's true. But it would have been more effective if they had just let that sit instead of flashing back to each individual fake word. And then there's the bit where he's like, that is the Aegean Sea. And then the... not Tulsi Gabbard. What was Kristen Gillibrand? The Kristen Gillibrand character is like, oh yeah, it is. And I guess it's fine. It just sort of, it doesn't sit as well. And there's like the Kristen Gillibrand character later, when at some point she learns, this fuel will create clouds of hydrogen gas inside a home and they'll blow up. And she's like, you mean this thing that I sold my soul for turns people's houses into the Hindenburg? And then later on in the movie, whenever that thing happens at the Glass Onion, all this gas gets sucked up into the air vents, and then it dollies in on Kristen Gillibrand, and she's like, oh, Hindenburg. And then, we get a wide shot and we see the Glass Onion explode. We didn't need her to say that. She already said that. We know what this stuff does. We don't need the reminder. We don't need the reminder that Elon Musk says fake words. I feel like a lot of that stuff in Knives Out works really well, and here it just doesn't quite work for me. The problem is that this cast and this they're choosing an extremely annoying group of people to make a movie about. And I like that. I like that this is a movie that is about influencers and about a billionaire, because that is very relevant. And it's a very different cohort of rich people compared to Knives Out. I think it's very plumbable. I like that the character Whiskey gets her like humanizing moment where we go from here she is being the display tits for a conservative streamer, and then later we get a conversation between her and Janelle Monáe where she talks about like her complicated business feelings about Dave Bautista's character and what she's trying to do, and like her feelings on the whole Manoverse thing or whatever. I liked that. I wish that there had been a bit more of that across the film. There is this whole thing about Alpha News, and I guess so the company that Miles Braun created is Alpha, and they have a whole bunch of things that aren't really well defined, and I think that is to this film's detriment. And I specifically, it's like with Dave Bautista's plot, there's this whole thing about he's a streamer and he's been set up at Twitch, but then he also wants to be on Alpha News, which is I guess a news channel. It's not explained whether or not Alpha News is a network news channel or if it is like InfoWars. I don't know. It's weird. Is it Fox? Is it InfoWars? I don't know. Is it Facebook? Because it kind of feels like Facebook at times. And so the lack of clarity on what kind of company this is and what it's doing is sort of weird. I think it's extremely funny that Janelle Monáe's character, the one who died, she did back of the napkin graph of all of the plan to get this website up and running. And you pause on that frame and it's like dark web conspiracy stuff. And it's like, wow, all these people suck. I kind of like that Janelle Monáe's sister character is like kind of shitty. You look at like what the company is and what it stood for and who these people are and who they became and like what is literally on that napkin, and you're like, oh, so she was also kind of a fascist though, or maybe not. I don't know. It's sort of hard to tell, and that's kind of one of the weird bits. I want to say more about Alpha here, that clearly they are meant to be sort of an Amazon slash InfoWars slash SpaceX kind of amalgam. You've got Alpha Courier delivering stuff, delivering the boxes at the beginning of the film. There's Alpha News, there's the rocket company. I understand the cipher that this is. It is a stand-in that we are meant to sort of fill in the blanks of. It's not that I don't know what Alpha is, it's that it feels like they're trying to roll all of these things together into one thing. And me, the rotten materialist that I am, I can't help but think, well, Amazon is a different kind of company than SpaceX. These are all things that come from very different types of people and emerged out of very different circumstances. And I feel like once you start saying, well, this company does sort of all of these things, it becomes harder for me to fill in the blanks. Like, this cipher is too broad. It's too much of an amalgam of different corporations. And it makes it kind of difficult for me to really pull a concise critique out of what they're doing with this. It is at a disadvantage with its setting and with its sort of like the people that it's chosen, because it's just the exteriors and the interiors. There's a lot of great set design in this movie, and there's some really cool lighting moments, but visually it is nowhere near Knives Out. Like, there's some good compositions. There are a bunch of moments where it's like everybody's lined up in the frame beautifully. There's lots of great images, great compositions, but none of it ever has the same hit. And it just doesn't feel as I hate to use this word, but vintage as Knives Out did. Just by virtue of who it's talking about, it leaves you with a lot less of substance to look at. And that's what the film is about vacuous people who have no substance. The Knives Out is sort of the same way. It's like, here are all these vacuous people who think that they're about one thing, but really they're just about money. But at least with Harlan, you had a guy who genuinely felt things and genuinely cared about the things in his home. So this home is like really interesting visually. It's just a cool set, a cool location. And I just don't feel the same way about the Glass Onion. And that's part of the point. And that's like my conflict with Glass Onion, is that the shallowness of the characters and of the setting and all of that is part of the point. The point is that these people are empty and have nothing good going on for them, and they're shallow, cannibalizing bastards. And everything for them is just an aesthetic, and they don't really care, and that's great. But it does leave you with a less interesting movie visually. It doesn't give you as much to grapple onto. My girlfriend is a big art history person, and she found a lot of irony in a lot of the props and things that are in the background. So I'm not saying that there's nothing there, but as always, it sort of depends upon your knowledge of history and genre. And that, your mileage will vary tremendously in that regard. There's also a repeated notion of you're latched on to Miles Braun's golden titty, and they say that a couple of times.
Every single one of you is holding on for dear life to Miles Bryan's golden titties.
The truth is that we are all holding on to that golden titty.
You're still holding on to his titties.
And I don't really like that line being repeated. There's too much reliance on shorthand. Like, there's actually, even in Knives Out, there is a moment where Ransom says,
"You've had your teeth in this family's tit for a long time."
So this is a metaphor that has been used in both films, and I think it's overused in Glass Onion, and I think a lot of the things and themes are too obvious, too open, too emphasized to really land as well as you would want them to. Did I shrug off my blanket? I meant to be wearing this blanket the whole time because I thought it would be cute. I guess I forgot. Maybe I shrugged it off at some point. I don't know. I do wonder how Glass Onion will age. I don't know. I don't know. I liked it. I enjoyed it as a film. I think it's an entertaining film, but I do think it is a weaker film than Knives Out. And I think it all kind of is summarized by the final shot. So Knives Out has a final shot that's really, really good. It's Marta coming out onto the balcony, and she looks down at the Thromby family. She's holding the cup, says, "My house, my rules, my coffee." And there's this last shot where she's got the Thromby estate, and all the Thrombys are down outside the house looking up at her, and they are completely at her mercy. And we just see her taking a long sip from this cup, and then it cuts to black. That's a great sequence. Glass Onion's version of that is she sits down at the beach with Benoit Blanc and he says, did you get the son of a bitch? And she says, yeah. And then the camera just sort of dollies in on her face. And then we cut to black. There's no indication of the power dynamics at play or like what victory she's gotten. And I find the ending of Glass Onion in that respect to be a little bit weird. Like, I'm not convinced that she has gotten off scot-free from that ending. I don't know how the events are going to progress beyond that point. Like with Knives Out, it's a question of, does Marta help the Thrombies or doesn't she? And that's an interesting, I like leaving that unanswered. I like that as a question. But this is sort of like, so she engaged in mass property destruction, and she is literally the one that destroyed the Mona Lisa. And there are no security cameras in his estate. And so it's all based on word, and everybody decides they're going to testify with her. But I just don't know. I don't know that it leaves me feeling like, so what are we doing here? You break their shit and you disgrace them in public, and that's it? Like, it doesn't say anything about wealth reappropriation, and I guess there's the implication that with the influencer's testimony, she'll be able to get the money that her sister was owed, but it just doesn't. It's not as clean. It's not as symbolically resonant to her character, to Janelle Monáe's character, and the way that Marta's arc is sort of related to her. And part of that comes from the fact that, like, I don't necessarily buy Janelle Monáe's Southern accent. I do think it's funny that this universe's idea of a detective is a famous actor or musician who puts on a fake Southern accent for Rian Johnson. And she does a good job with it. I don't think she does a bad job, but I don't think she's quite there.
Heavens, the dog ate the caviar again.
That's sort of how I feel about Glass Onion, is that it's really, really close. It's close in a lot of ways, but it very clearly did not have as much money, probably did not have as much time. I don't know. It doesn't have quite the same timelessness to it. I think Knives Out is going to be a good detective story for a long time to come. I wonder how well Glass Onion is going to age. And I don't think that that's necessarily a problem, because if you go back and read Agatha Christie novels, you'll see that there's a lot of references to contemporary politics that just go completely over your head. And that's just how it is. That's just history, baby. And I think it's completely legitimate for Rian Johnson to make a movie about his Twitter feed. It is an online movie, but that's okay. I like it when a movie is about real things in real places and real people. Like, it's funny how, like, there was the whole thing about Tar, another movie that came out this year, not like Minotaurs or Tar furries, but T-A-R, a woman, a fictional woman who got canceled and did nothing wrong. There was some reaction to that film that I saw of people like, I can't believe this really happened in real life, and then looking it up and being like, oh my God, it was fiction? Well, that seems deceptive. We kind of just stopped making movies about the present, about people who live in the world as it exists. It's weird. We live in a weird cultural moment, and I like that there is a push to kind of bring things back to being about people who live in our world and the tensions that we have right now. Does Glass Onion do as good a job as it could do with all of those elements? No, absolutely not. But I think it does a pretty admirable job. I wish the dialogue were a bit more polished. I wish the script had gotten through at least one more full draft. I felt like the insults that are levied against Miles Braun are not heavy enough. You brainless, dim-witted jackass. It just didn't land for me. Benoit Blanc is a Southern working-class guy. He can say some better cusses than that. I wish it had been a bit rougher around the... Like, it's too clean. They're all these shitty people, but they're not mean enough to each other, and they're not mean enough to it just... For being about how shitty rich people are, it's not enough about how shitty rich people are. The last thing I wanted to note is that like Joni in Knives Out, she is sort of like a bimbo character, but even she gets a moment of, they're putting kids in cages. I mean, these are camps. That is like, that's a great moment of humanizing her in a similar way that whiskey gets humanized, but it's not at the same level. And there is a bimbo character in Glass Onion who gets no humanization moments. And I feel like the general cast of influencers really don't get enough humanization. I don't think any of them really get the opportunity to stand out or like imprint themselves upon that character the way that the actors in Knives Out did. Like it's just really difficult to stand up against Laurie Strode and Michael Shannon. Jor-El, not Jor-El, not Kal-El. What is his name in that stupid movie, The Man of Steel? Is it Jor-El? No, that's his dad. What's Sarah from A Future here? I've been editing this video, and as I've been going through, I have taken some notes on some things that I didn't say and some potential revisions of thoughts, because as I was editing this video, I obviously had cause to go through the film and find images of moments that I wanted to share for whatever silly fart joke I was telling earlier. When I recorded this video, it had been a few weeks after I had let my thoughts on Glass Onion simmer for a while. Like I had sort of come to a lot of the conclusions that I just talked about and then sat on them for a while. And now as I've been revisiting Glass Onion, since it sort of faded from my consciousness and other media has come in to take its place, and now I'm thinking about it again, I had some other thoughts. I will just say, going through it again, I think I'm a little bit too harsh on this film's visuals. The images themselves are not necessarily always as interesting as the ones that are in Knives Out, but I would say that this film tries to make up for it with camera movements. I'm not necessarily always convinced that it works, but they try. There's a lot of really interesting dollies with zooms. Very different from a dolly zoom, because a dolly zoom is when the rate of acceleration of the dolly and the rate of adjusting the zoom on a zoom lens are inversely proportional. So that creates the effect of widening or thinning the depth of field in front of and behind your subject. These are more like the camera is trucking frame left while zooming in. I like a lot of those shots. I think they're well done. I think the visual style of this film is better than I give it credit for. There are a lot of really nice compositions and images. One question that I wanted to ask in this review that I forgot to ask was, does Glass Onion have a moment like the one in Knives Out, where Marta comes out of the house after the will reading and she's discovered that she has now been given the entire Thrombey estate. She comes out and the whole family is pursuing her, and there's a little dolly in on her face as she comes out of the house, and then the camera just gets picked up off the tripod and goes directly into a handheld shot and follows her into the car. Like the whole film up to this point, more or less, has just been dolly shots and tripod shots. And now we're handheld in a way that is like, it's sort of towards the middle of the film. Like I said in my video, it was the first indication that I wanted to write about that film. Does Glass Onion have a moment like that? And I would say it does, but it happens almost at the very beginning of the film. They do split screen in the scene where they've got the mystery boxes and they're all trying to figure it out and they're all on the phone. And so the split screen just sort of dances in all of these weird shapes and angles. And I remember the first time watching it, I paused fairly like midway through that sequence and was just like, oh, this is so exciting. This is a completely different visual language than what they used for Knives Out. I'm excited to see where they go with this. And the problem is that they just don't do it again. If we accept the premise that this is an answer to the dolly shot, handheld shot in Knives Out, that creative choice is made to accentuate a moment of specific emotion. And it works really, really well, and you only need it once, and that's it. But I feel like this, the split screen thing that they're doing, that is very much in line with silent films, particularly Suspense. Is that the one? Suspense by, I think it's Lois Weber, which has the angular split screen of woman calling her husband because there's a homeless guy breaking into her house. If you haven't picked up on this by now, I like images. I like it when things make me go, ooh. And I wish that there had been more of that in this movie. That effect and that choice is so cool and potent. Oh, look at all this fun interlocking web of people communicating. And then we get to Janelle Monáe and she just breaks the box. Like, that's a fun kind of stylistic juxtaposition too, as well as just substance. And then they never do that again, and it feels a little bit like they put that a bit too forefront, and so the rest of the film there isn't really another moment quite like that stylistically, and that's sort of a shame. There are a couple of attempts, I think. There is one when Helen and Blanc are on the porch and she's telling him all of her backstory. The camera there, this should be just like a simple 2-shot where they're just sitting on this balcony and it's just shot, reverse shot. I don't think that's what a 2-shot is. There's a lot of like dollies and things, and they like switch the 180 a couple of times. There are a couple of really complicated camera moves where she's delivering a line and the camera like dramatically dollies across the table and pushes in, or there's a close-up of her where she's talking about the day where she identified her sister's body, and then she says, and then I got this box, and then the camera zooms out really wide. It's cool, it's good. But it felt a little bit try-hard to me the first time I watched it, and every time I watch it, I'm like, I like what they're doing. They're trying to make this visually interesting because the sequence is fairly long. As a visual storyteller, you don't just want to be doing shot, reverse shot, the whole time and just kind of slowly cutting in on close-ups or whatever. Ideally, you'd want to do a little bit of something to spice things up, and they do spice things up with that sequence here, but I don't know if it is rooted to the material in quite the same way. Also, on the point of Dave Bautista and the influencers in general, and me not really getting Bautista's character or a lot of the influencers, and specifically Bautista as like an Alex Jones type, I got a comment on the rough cut that I posted to patreon.com/LTS or LTAS or camaraderie.co/Sarah was that they thought that this was more of an Andrew Tate type character, and I realized I don't really know shit about Andrew Tate because I don't care. I don't care about any of these people or any of what they do. I find them toxic and obnoxious, and they sort of poison my brain every time I learn a little bit more about them. So I try not to know about these people. So it's possible that the cultural pastiche going on with these characters is just going completely over my head because I'm not familiar enough with this subculture. As I said at the beginning of this film, your mileage may vary depending on what you're aware of, and it's just entirely possible that I had a lot of approximate awareness of the pool of references that Knives Out was drawing on, and I don't have as much of a pool of awareness on the things that Glass Onion is drawing upon. The last question I want to ask is, what is gained by telling Glass Onion in the order that it is told? I make a big to-do about the fact that it's 2 halves that are sort of 2 different detective stories. Maybe one is from Miranda's perspective, one is from Helen's perspective. What is gained by this non-linearity, where we are told the story once with a lot of key details omitted, and then we are told the same story again from a different perspective that lets us inside of a lot of those details? I feel like the modernist version of this film would be linear in that respect. Doing it non-linearly in this way, it sort of sets up expectations and then perverts your expectations. It sets up expectations knowing that it is going to twist around on them in the second half. Is it a gimmick? Is it too much of a flourish? One of these art is objectively bad or good people could easily look at this and go, it's style over substance. If you take away the non-linearity, the whole film falls apart, or it would just be a boring sort of nothing detective story. But precisely what I like about film as a medium is its ability to reflect the arbitrary whims of its creators. A story that is told in this non-linear fashion that unfolds over time and plays with your expectations, it's not necessarily better or worse than just telling the same story in a linear fashion, but it's doing so for a different reason, to a different end. And I think this comes back to Rian Johnson's awareness of and play with genre and narrative stereotypes. And ultimately, it's fun. It's a fun ride. It makes for a fun ride. And I think that's Rian Johnson as a filmmaker, top to bottom. Some of them have more substance than others. I like a lot of his social commentary in his works, but I don't necessarily think that it is like terribly incisive or unique. It's just nice to see in a movie from this mainstream a director, I guess. For me, watching film and criticizing film, it's not about saying, is this good or is this bad? It's just about understanding the craft of storytelling. When I say that this film is, that Glass Onion is in 2 parts, I think now that maybe what that means is that the first half of the film is from the perspective of, we assume, Miranda Brand, and then the second half of the film is from the perspective of Helen Brand, and that's interesting. That is interesting. I just put that together, and that's sort of interesting. I would say Glass Onion does the same thing that Knives Out does in terms of showing people of higher class circling the wagons against somebody of lower class, but it's a little bit weirder for Glass Onion because Janelle Monáe's class position isn't entirely clear to me. There is a part of me that sort of feels weird about the fact that Janelle Monáe's character, whether she is Miranda or Helen, is always as polished as Janelle Monáe. Her eyebrows are always perfectly plucked. This is one of my ongoing bugbears is just the fact that everybody is always wearing makeup. Women are always wearing makeup even when they're not supposed to be wearing makeup. It really annoys me when that's the case. And it's weird in this film because we get, Helen Brand showing up to the Blanc residence and she's supposed to look poor, I think. It might just be that I do not have the cultural dictionary for this specific character to really read. Does Janelle Monáe, when she shows up at Blanc's house, does she look poor? Does she look poor? Sound off in the comments if she looks poor to you, because I still felt like, oh, she's still kind of, is she Southern? Like, what is her class position exactly? Because her sister went on to be like a Silicon Valley startup type, and you don't really become one of those on your own steam. Certainly not one that is like hyper fixated on weaponizing the dark web. I don't know. It's just weird. It's like when you start pulling with Marta's family, it's crystal clear. She comes from a family of immigrants and she's a nurse. I'm just not as clear about the power dynamics between Miranda and Helen and the rest of the world. And that makes it harder to read her character and the stakes of the narrative and what exactly it means. And I worry, as I've been going through this video, that I might be getting a little bit into like hyperfixating on Janelle Monáe's appearance and her affect more than anybody else's. I don't like that that I keep coming back to that, but it is weird to me that like we see Miranda's body and we see Helen identifying that body, and Miranda's body, like her skin isn't gray, her hair isn't messed up, her makeup isn't messed up. She looks like she died a second before they started filming this scene. I think that is maybe a problem with this series and its position in Hollywood as it exists right now, because Rian Johnson in Knives Out, there is the scene where Harlan cuts his own throat, and the original version, he said, of that scene was much bloodier, like cartoonishly bloody, and they ended up having to paint a lot of that out, and that is basically just to make this murder mystery more family friendly. To an extent, I'm fine with that because there is still blood in Knives Out, and there is still a threat of like stabbings or sort of a viscerally painful sort of thing. And obviously with this, there is the whole thing of if you're poisoning somebody, it's impersonal and you don't really feel like you're killing somebody. They just fall asleep. That sort of makes sense, but it's also like the idea is that, they find her in her car and they assume that she's committed suicide. So it's like, well, then she'll have been sitting there for a while. Her body, so it's just sort of, it's a little bit too clean. It's a little bit too polished around those edges where I feel like death is made a bit too nice. Even Duke's death, as much as I like the table break and his falling over, and I think that's Batista's best moment in the film, I almost wanted it to go a little bit more. I guess he's not like poisoned. He's just having a mortal allergic reaction to pineapple juice. Just to pause for a second on the pineapple juice thing, I'm fine with that, but the setup for it is really, really clumsy. And I think that it sort of personifies a lot of my problems with this film's script, where the way that they set up Duke's pineapple allergy is they just have him say,
No pineapple in there, right? Duke don't dance with pineapple.
That's a clumsy insertion. That feels very much like we've got to set this up somewhere. Let's put the hook here, whatever. And I don't know necessarily where or how you would get that pineapple allergy in a more natural way, but it is sort of like when it happened, when the reveal happened in the film, and they cut back to that moment of him saying, "The Duke don't dance with pineapple." It's a little bit clumsy. It's a little bit clumsy. Was this a coherent video? Did I succeed? Did I succeed in what I was trying to do with this one? I thought about doing a scripted video about Glass Onion, and I just couldn't. I don't really have I did a scripted video about Knives Out because I felt like it's a really solidly constructed film that is an interesting conversation with the history of crime dramas, but the history of Hollywood in general, and it's just in conversation with so many things. And I feel like Glass Onion is not in quite the same level. I don't put all of that on Rian Johnson's shoulders or any of the production, anybody involved in the production, or any of the performers involved. I think a lot of it just comes down to money and time, as always. Like what really makes a difference between a good movie and a bad movie is money and time. It's a Netflix production, and Netflix doesn't give people a lot of money or a lot of time. And it does have some kind of, there's some Netflixy grime around the edges. There are some particular lines that I really liked. I really like? He just put pineapple juice in his whiskey. Yeah, I like that line delivery. That's a good line delivery. I liked Glass Onion. I didn't like it as much as Knives Out. I think that it is a flawed film that does not hold up. It's not as rewatchable as Knives Out. I would say watch it twice. Because there's some themes. There's some good themes. Like I like how much very early on in the second half of the movie, it's like Blanc saying like, well, Miles Braun is not an idiot. I do like how the themes are like woven into the film. It just plays them out too much for us. It just highlights them too much for us. And that's the problem. You don't feel smart for figuring out a detective story when the detective story itself visually shows you everything. Like when What's-Her-Face grabs the baseball at the end of Knives Out. In my video, I have a whole thing about the arc of the baseball. They could have shown us every single scene where we see, here's the baseball here, here's the baseball there, here's the baseball here, and finally it's back to here. And that would have ruined the entire subplot because it would just be spelled out for us. Now we're not rewarded for having paid attention. We're not expected to pay attention at all because the movie's just going to tell you. And I just don't like that. And I think that Glass Onion tells you too much. And that is my review of Glass Onion. Thanks for watching. I'm a trans woman. Sarah from One Last Future here. I just wanted to say that I've watched the first episode of Poker Face since recording this video, and it's great, and I love it, and I can't wait to watch the rest of it. And I think that if Glass Onion is slightly worse because Rian Johnson was more interested in making Lesbian Columbo, then that, in my book, is a perfectly fine sacrifice, and I retract everything bad I said about Glass Onion. I think it's great. It's not as good as Knives Out, but that's okay, because some movies are worse than other movies, and you still like them anyway. That's what I've been trying to say this entire video. Some movies are worse than other movies, but you're allowed to still like them anyway. Do not take all of the negative things that I said about Glass Onion as me saying that Glass Onion is a bad movie. I'm only saying that it is a worse movie than Knives Out. It is still a better movie than a lot of movies, and that is okay. It is okay, in fact, actually, and probably preferable, in fact, actually, for our idea of what is good and what is bad to be a gradient rather than a binary. Anyway, this postscript went on way longer than I meant it to. Bye. Thank you for watching this YouTube video about the Rian Johnson film Glass Onion. I have been Sarah Zedig. My pronouns have been she, her. Please, 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 if you like my work, why not consider giving me just a bit of money, just a little bit of money, just a morsel, just a bit on patreon.com/LTS or camaraderie.co/Sarah Zedig. Speaking of which, I would allow me to thank my $10 a month supporters. Anarcho Duck, Anaphylaxis, Athiette, Bobby Jane DeForge, C. Hoover, Cam Chacon, Dick Beninia, Draken Lupin, Duchess, Emma Sylvia, Evan Ritchie, Halsey, J. MacD, J.B. Silbinary Wolf, Jane the Human, Catherine Jibes, L something something, Natalie Watts, Patrick Feeney, Pinball Witch, Quirk, Richard Dunbeck, Robin, Susie Miniike, Z, Bellicose, Mad Figs, Optimistic Duelist, Rubeline, Scott Olson, Prum, Jay Jorts, Chthonic Syzygies, Joe Somebody 2, Kate Shrike, Vriska Zone, The Girls, Now I Only Want to Triumph, and Apocalypse Arisen. Wow, that sure was a lot of names that I just read out loud. If you wanted to be one of those, then give me $10 somewhere. I'll do it if you give me money that place and your name shows up on the list. If your name shows up on the list, I'll read it. I don't have a choice unless I don't make any videos, which is always, that is my choice. If I don't want to read your name, I just won't make any videos. So you're powerless either way. Of course, $5 patrons get access to notes and scripts and various unused materials for all of my videos. I would also like to take a second to promote something else that I'm working on that is completely different and probably totally alienating to the entire prospective audience of this video. I'm working on a Homestuck fanfiction called God Feels. I did a video about it 2 years ago. Yes, it's still ongoing. Yes, I'm going to do another video about it eventually. I'm probably going to be balancing God Feels and video essays for the next couple of years at least. After taking a year-long break, God Feels 3 Part 2 has begun on AO3. I'll have a link in the description. I've designed it in such a way as to be hopefully a pretty good jumping on point for people who have not read God Feels yet and possibly have not read Homestuck. So if you're curious at all what if I know what I'm talking about, if I have any sort of claim to understanding narratives, and you just want to see, let me if you're so smart, why don't you write something? You can go and read that and then decide whether or not I know what I'm talking about. There will never be one answer because nobody knows what they're talking about. And everybody knows what they're talking about. What was I talking about? Promotion, right. Twitter. I'm on Twitter at HMSNoFun. I'm on co-host at Sarah's Edig. I'm on Tumblr at HMSNoFun. I'm on Shrike Club. I'm on Mastodon at Sarah's Edig at Shrike.club. I am on other websites. I'm on co-host. Did I say that already? Oh boy, I'm suddenly running out of a lot of steam. There are so many websites now. I love it. I'm so glad that Twitter is finally fucking dying because we've just had like 3 websites for the last 10 years and it's been the worst thing for the internet. And I'm so glad that we're getting a bunch of new weird websites that are like, hey, do you want to play around with CSS? Remember when you could customize web pages? Remember when you could have fun doing things on the internet? Well, now you can again, thanks to Elon Musk. Everybody wins, baby.